There's a lot at stake, in particular the razor-thin margins in the United States Congress. And in a state like Arizona, which is the most consequential swing state in America, we have some very competitive congressional seats. If the Republicans lose control of Congress in 2026, you could rest assured that the Democrats will go after this president, and it will be all about impeachment, impeachment, impeachment.
This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture. As America approaches its 250th birthday, many believe the real future of our nation won't be decided in Washington, but in Arizona, Florida, Texas, and other states across the country. Will there be a big red wave in 2026? And is America positioned to flourish for another 250 years? Today, we're joined by Karrin Taylor Robson to talk about why the 2026 midterms are so consequential and why faithful citizens must pay close attention. She's an attorney, business leader, former Arizona Board of Regents member, and she's running for governor of Arizona. She spent her whole life advocating for strong families and constitutional principles. You can watch this episode on Coral Ridge Ministries streaming platform at crm.tv or on the Coral Ridge Ministries YouTube channel. You can listen on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. If you find this conversation timely and insightful, would you please pause and leave a 5-star review? It helps more people discover this content. And be sure to follow the show on Instagram at Coral Ridge Min, or follow me at Rob Pacienza. Now, please welcome Karrin Taylor Robson to the City of God. So America turns 250 years this year. Do you think we're headed towards renewal or decline?
You know, I am an eternal optimist.
So am I.
And I believe we are headed toward a renewal.
So heading towards renewal, what do you think that says and reveals about the future of our country?
I think it's good. I think our future is good. You know, as I travel around the state of Arizona, you know, one of the highlights of a campaign is being able to go to different churches every week. And churches are filling up. And it's the young kids, you know, they're seeking the truth. They're seeking something more than we've been giving them. And, you know, I just think that pursuit of truth portends good things for our country.
As you're running for governor, you're in different churches all the time. Would you say that is your experience? You're not only hearing that on the news about churches filling up and young people returning to worship, but you're actually seeing it firsthand, correct?
Absolutely. And actually, I've been seeing it for several years just in my own church. When I travel, we never miss Sunday. You know, wherever we are, we find a church. And, you know, I've seen the pews filling up. And now as I travel around the state with different denominations, I'm seeing it. You know, they're pulling chairs into the back of the church, or, you know, and I've noticed that it's young men. A lot of young men are showing up, and that gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Yeah. They're hungry for the truth, and they know the right source to find it.
Yes.
So when we think about 2026, not only is it the 250th anniversary of America, but it's also a midterm year. And midterms don't normally get as much attention as a general election. And everybody says, it doesn't matter what year it is, that this is, or it doesn't matter what election it is, this is the most important election in a lifetime. But why is this midterm in 2026 one of the most consequential elections maybe in a generation? Why is that?
Well, there's a lot at stake, you know, in particular the razor-thin margins in the United States Congress. If the Republicans lose control of Congress in 2026, you could rest assured that the Democrats will go after this president, President Trump, and his 4 years turns into 2 years. And it will be all about impeachment, impeachment, impeachment. And, you know, that's not good for anyone. And so, you know, the president and his team and candidates across this country are going to be very, very focused on maintaining those majorities. And in a state like Arizona, which is one of the, if not the most consequential swing state in America, one of the most consequential, we have some very competitive congressional seats. So there's going to be a lot of effort put on Arizona as a state. And of course, the gubernatorial race will be at the top of the ticket. So who is nominated to run against an incumbent governor will have a lot of impact on the down ballot races.
Speaking about executive leadership at the state level, I don't think it's any surprise that the gridlock and the nonsense in Washington, D.C. just continues to increase, not decrease. What does that say about the importance of executive leadership at the state level regarding America's future?
Well, I would start by saying our founders, our founding fathers, were beyond brilliant. The checks and balances in our constitutional form of government continue to amaze me. And one of the most important things they did in the 10th Amendment, was the enumerated powers to the federal government. Everything else was left to the states or the people, right? And governors, as executive leaders of our 50 states, play an incredible role. And I think it's incumbent on governors to lead in a way that Washington will listen, because Washington is broken. The bureaucracy that has grown so large over so many years has made a human flourishing very, very difficult, because the government has grown so big. President Trump has come in and has done everything possible to rein in the size of government and get government out of the way, and he's going to need help. A lot of help from the governors to do that. But our founders created a system that allows that to happen.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Our founders were brilliant, but particularly never wanting the government to really run, at least the federal government, to run all things, but to give the power back to the people.
Yes.
And so when we think about the states and the importance of the states as a laboratory for either renewal or decline. I remember a historian, American historian, once said that we are a people obsessed with national politics, that we could on any given day tell you the full itinerary of the president. We could tell you his cabinet and what's happening with the press secretary, but we couldn't name a member of our local school board. We couldn't tell you what's going on our local city council. Why is it so important right now for people to get re-engaged, particularly people of faith, to not only be engaged at what's happening at the national level, but to be engaged with what's happening at the state level and even the local level?
Well, first, as a matter of governing philosophy, the best decisions are made closest to home, including the home, right? And the farther you get away from that decision, the more difficult it becomes, right? And so it should be home, local government, state government, and then the federal government and the back of the bus, as I say. But there has been this obsession with national politics, unfortunately. And we have to turn away from that and look to our school boards, right? We have to know who's on that school board. Conservatives have ceded that responsibility to the left decades and decades ago. But this experiment, this American experiment in self-government, requires every single one of us to be engaged at every level. It's a responsibility of a self-government.
So you're running for the governor of Arizona. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself and why you're running.
Well, I come from Arizona. We are the youngest state in the continental U.S., so we're young and feisty, but we have an incredible DNA to our state. People have come to Arizona from all over the country. Over 70% of our adults have come from somewhere else. They've left their families, their homes, their traditions to come to a place where if you treat people well and work hard, you can accomplish anything. And so it makes it, a microcosm of America. But I grew up in a family, I was raised Catholic, grew up where my parents just modeled for us what it means to participate in a self-governing society. My father was in elected office since I was in first grade. And so I watched the sacrifices he made by going down to the Capitol, and I would often accompany him. So I got to watch it. And they just instilled in us this responsibility to give back and this sense of gratitude. My mother was always, every time I'd say I was lucky, she said no. She'd say, no, you're blessed. We are blessed. We're blessed to live in this country, but with those blessings come responsibility.
Yeah.
And that was instilled in me and my siblings growing up.
Now, we have people watching and or listening to this podcast from all around the nation. Obviously, not everybody in our audience can vote for you, but I think it's fair to say everybody listening and watching to this podcast should pay close attention to your race in particular and what's happening in Arizona. Why is that?
Well, we currently have a Democrat governor who has vetoed over 400 bills, including 33 election reform bills. And you might recall back in the year 2000 when Florida couldn't seem to count their ballots, and Florida was essentially the laughingstock of the nation. Arizona today has similar problem, and it's because of the way the laws are written, and they need to be changed. And our legislature, our Republican legislature, has sent 33 election reform bills to the governor, and she has vetoed every single one of them. And we need to make a change in the governor's office so that we can have meaningful election reform. So that in 2028, when we have our next presidential election, we can be assured that there's confidence instilled in the Arizona election process.
I think it was in the 50s or 60s, sociologists and political scientists, as they were studying kind of the demographics of America, often called California the laboratory for the rest of America. What happens in California will eventually happen throughout the country. I think it's fair to say today in the 21st century, what's happening in Arizona is maybe a preview of the future for the rest of America. Why is that, and where do you see Arizona heading?
Well, I go back to what I said earlier. The DNA of Arizona is conservative. People who have left their home, their family, their tradition, their jobs, whatever, to come to a place where we still have freedom, right? Government is not so intrusive that we can't fulfill our God-given destiny. And, so Arizona must continue to nurture that. And I think with good conservative leadership back at the top, we can be that shining city on the hill, in Ronald Reagan's words, I think, quoting scripture. But we can be, and we should be, so that other states can follow our lead. And we have other great states doing great things. I look at Florida, and you look at the exodus coming out of the Northeast down to Florida, because it too, government stays out of the way for large measure and doesn't tax you to death. And, people vote with their feet. They're moving to Florida. They're moving to Arizona. They're moving to Texas. They're moving to places where freedom is still valued.
As you're on the campaign trail in this midterm election year, we keep seeing the same themes coming up over and over again: border security, people wanting freedom, wanting to make sure freedom is secured for their children and their grandchildren. Just this sense of cultural sanity that we're able to call a woman and a man. Just basic common sense values. What are the issues you're hearing directly from concerning your constituents, and what do you believe are the issues that will rise to the top?
Well, the number one issue everywhere I go is the economy and affordability.
Yeah.
A study recently came out that the median age of first-time homebuyers is 40. And it wasn't that long ago that it was, 32. That's not sustainable for the future of the next generation. We have to do something about that. But specifically to your question, on immigration is always near the top. Arizona is the point, the tip of the spear. During the Biden open border years, about 85% of the drugs coming into America came in through Arizona. And so Arizona paid a disproportionate price, both in the loss of human life and just economic toll that it took on our state. And so when I'm governor, my number one priority is to ensure the safety and security of our communities, starting with the border. But I come from the business world. Like, I'm not a career politician at all. I've never been in elected office. I will bring my business experience to the table to try and tackle some of the affordability problems. Now, a governor can't, we can't do much about inflation or interest rates. That's a direct result of Washington being broken and Congress spending too much money for too many years. But there's a lot of things that a governor can do to eliminate red tape, get more housing units into a marketplace that is, hungry for more housing units. When you have a growth state like Arizona, you have to have the supply to meet the demand. If you don't, prices go up, and then the younger generation cannot afford a house. And then, of course, we have so many of our young people that are saddled with student debt. So this is an opportunity to hit a great reset when it comes to higher education. And there's a lot that a governor can do, in my own state about controlling the cost of higher education and making sure our universities, our public universities in particular, are providing value for the money that our kids are paying for higher education today.
Let's go back to border security for a moment. My father used to live near the Mexico border in Arizona, and I remember growing up as a child, you'd go down that road, I forget what it is, from Tucson down to Tombstone and Bisbee and Benson, and always would see border security checkpoints. And I remember in the last seemed like 5-6 years, you just saw it decrease. So I know for people living in Arizona that means something. They're used to it, and we've seen it with the previous administration just slowly evaporate, as you said, the open border administration that Joe Biden brought to America. Why? And I often hear it said as a pastor, I even hear Christians say it, well-meaning Christians, well-meaning members of the faith community say, well, isn't it more compassionate to have open borders? How do we balance that idea? You're a woman of faith, you're running for governor. How do we balance that approach and give people the right perspective that actually the most compassionate thing we can do is to protect our neighbors first? How do you balance that message? Open borders versus having secure borders, compassionate versus being protective and thinking about our neighbors right there in the state of Arizona?
It's a good question, but I would start by saying, how is it compassionate that people are so desperate that they're leaving their home countries?
Yeah.
I mean, look at what's going on in Venezuela. Look at, we should be focused on these countries that are driving their own people away.
Yeah.
Right? And then we could focus on what we need to focus on. That's our families and our neighbors.
Yeah.
We cannot take care of everyone.
Yeah.
And there's a great, Bill Bennett, the former Secretary of Education, had a great test. He called it the Gates test. When the gates are up, which way do they run, in or out? So we need to be asking the question of those other countries where their own citizens are running out. Why is that?
Yeah, absolutely.
We need to hold them accountable.
Yep. And we need to make sure our audience understands loving our neighbor well means making sure our neighbors, our citizens first, are protected and taken care of. That's what it means to be compassionate.
That's right. And during the open border era, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of those illegal crossers are victims of human trafficking. I heard a number that 300,000 kids are missing. Where are they? What are they doing? Why are they missing? So we have to be compassionate for those people. Mm-hmm. And by just letting them flood in, we've made them victims.
We need to be reminded we are a nation built on immigrants.
Yes.
We are proud of that.
Yes.
But immigrants that came into the country legally,
correct,
and the right way, honored our system, honored our tradition, and that's really what we need to restore in Arizona and all across the border. Let's talk about just for the family that's watching. I mean, I think we've seen a lot of attack on parental rights, choice, freedoms. Speak to the mom or the dad out there. As governor, you can only do your part in Arizona, but what are you fighting for? concerning the nuclear family, the traditional family, to ensure parents are the primary gatekeepers and the primary protectors and providers of their children?
Well, it's, a lot of it's wrapped up in our education system, right? Parents should be fully in charge of their children's education. And for far too long, the left and the public school system in America have kept parents at bay. I hear stories of parents spending thousands and thousands of dollars to try and get access to the curriculum that their kids are being taught. That's unacceptable. Parents should be able to have access to curriculum. Parents should be able to have access to health records. When you hear stories of the counselors and schools, promoting and protecting all, these gender confused kids and pushing this gender ideology on them, that's unacceptable. I mean, that, in my belief system, that is evil, trying to destroy the nuclear family, trying to create confusion and chaos, right? Confusion and chaos, that's what evil does.
They're the tools of the enemy.
They are the tools of the enemy, and we should call it as such. It's a reflection of this existential human condition between good and evil, between God and the devil, whatever you want to call it. And they want to sow chaos. I often say, God created two genders, and, the left created the rest. Our kids deserve better, and parents need to be in a position to be able to protect their kids, protect and preserve their family. And education is such a critical part of that parents should be in the driver's seat when it comes to their education. They should be able to choose the best education pathway for their children.
Whether it's been running for governor, serving on the Board of Regents, leading in business in the business community, what have been some lessons you've learned about what it means to apply your faith or to live out your faith in the community and in the public sector?
I have learned that you have to be bold. I've learned that courage is contagious. And when you lead, people want to follow. In my business career, I've always been surrounded by, I always say I've surrounded myself with people smarter than I am. I come from the real estate and development world, and so I'm surrounded by the engineers and the finance people, and I learned I can't do their job, and they can't do my job. I always found myself at the head of the table. I always found myself the one leading the teams. Being able to articulate a vision and drive a team to a goal. Those things are, critically important to be able to accomplish a result and a goal. And so that's the journey I've been on. And for whatever reason, substantively, I've learned, a lot of things along the way in business that matter to a governor, from tax policy, regulatory policy, water policy, which is important in Arizona. All those substantive things are important. But the lessons of leadership have put me where I am today and put me on this journey.
That's awesome. I love the idea of a business leader running for office. It sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Business leaders get things done. Now, everybody watching or listening to this podcast, they can't run for president. They can't run for governor. But every single Christian can get involved some way. What would be your call to action, your encouragement to every Christian out in America about one way, even if it's a simple way, that they can serve in the political sphere?
Well, of course, the most important thing to do is vote. You would be shocked at how many God-fearing, God-loving Christians don't vote because they don't believe their vote counts, and it does. And these elections matter, and you want to support and work for, if you can, as a volunteer, make phone calls, knock doors, whatever it is. Support the people that are in the arena, because it is not easy. I have been a lifelong conservative Christian. I'm a mother. I have 4 kids. I was a single mother for years. Life has not been easy. It's and so you need people to help you and surround you, and being in the political arena, people are like, how do you do it every day? Well, you do it when you know you're surrounded by people that care. So everybody out there, just, find a candidate, find somebody to support, but at the end of the day, don't forget to vote.
Yeah. And when we think about our local communities, you can run for city commissioner, you can run for a seat on the school board. Just show up to a meeting.
Just show up.
I think people would be so surprised if we're really concerned about the future of education. It begins at the local level. What's happening in our county school boards and our school systems, and what's the curriculum that they're giving to our children. We've often heard it said in the last few years that we're no longer educating our children, we're indoctrinating them. Right. And we really need to reclaim that, but it really does begin at the local level.
And I think, for parents, it's important to model for your children. We model for our children the importance of going to church on Sundays and volunteering at the church, and all that's fabulous. But in addition to that, we have to model what it means to be a civically engaged and responsible citizen of our self-governing society. Yeah. And if we don't, we're going to lose it. So we have to model it for our children.
Amen. You've mentioned it several times, kind of what inspires you, why you're running, but just reiterate for our audience, much like our current president, he didn't need this. He could have rested on the laurels of his accomplishments in the business community. I don't need to tell you, politics is tough. You didn't need this. You didn't need to run for governor. What keeps you going, even through the difficult moments?
Gratitude for the people who came before us. In a word, I was asked to answer that question in a word, and I say Arlington, right? Arlington Cemetery. You just look at that and you realize the number of people that died for us to have the freedoms that we have. So it's gratitude to those that came before us, and it's a responsibility to the people that come after us. At the end of the day, we can't take it with us, right? And we have to, I have to look at my kids in the eye and say, I tried everything to leave it as good as I found it. And that's a lot easier said than done these days.
Now, it sounds a lot like stewardship. And I just want to thank you on behalf of Coral Ridge Ministries and the City of God podcast. Thank you for answering the call. We are called to steward our citizenship. We talked about the importance of stewarding our vote, stewarding our calling, and you are certainly stewarding your calling in this critical moment. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the City of God and everything you're doing to encourage everybody out there to be hopeful.
Yep. Thank you, Karrin.
Thank you.
I love that conversation with Karrin, and I hope you did too. Please, if you haven't already, leave us a 5-star review and tell others why they should be listening to the City of God. You can catch new episodes of the City of God weekly. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. This City of God podcast is produced by Coral Ridge Ministries and made in partnership with the Institute for Faith and Culture. This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture.